Hello nerds and welcome to Into the Wild, your monthly wildlife and conservation podcast where we look at what's going on around the world to do with nature and people. This year we're proudly partnered with the Royal Entomological Society. If you're like Nadia and I and you love insects, then we recommend checking out the RES's new associate membership. For just £15 a year, you can join their thriving global community dedicated and excited by insect science. This membership gives you access to the RES's library services, a digital subscription to Antenna, and discounts on their wide range of events and publications. Follow the link in the write-up of this episode to learn more and join. Well, it's a rainy evening in London, Nadia.
Yeah, does it smell nice? No, but rain makes things smell nice, doesn't it? It releases the aromas of spring.
Well, I'm indoors, so I know outside smells wet.
Yeah, okay.
I think it smells nice in probably a woodland, but I don't know if the streets of London particularly smell nice.
No. There is a name for it. I haven't got it to hand, but that the smell made when a raindrop goes on even like roads and concrete, there's a name for it. It's probably Japanese. They've got a name for everything, but like. That's
funny. I said that today.
Did you?
I said that today because I've done some very wholesome things. I made my own. God, it's going to make me sound like a member of the WI. I made my own elderflower cordial.
Nice.
And this evening, I have simmered and boiled English ivy leaves chopped up because they contain saponins that release soap the same as conkers, and I'm making laundry detergent. But the reason why I said this is because I was talking to a friend and I said, it's just a lovely thing to do, stuff like this. It's such a lovely feeling when you wash your clothes with detergent you made yourself. I don't know what the English word is or even if there's a phrase, but I bet there's a word in Japanese because they have wonderful words for everything.
Nice. Well, anyone listening, as always, if you have that word for doing nice things,
please let us know.
That's lovely. I'm actually going to try that. You've encouraged me to try it. You sent me a link on how to do it. I actually don't have heaps of ivy in my garden, but I'll but it's everywhere, so I'll just go harvest some.
Honestly, you do need about 60 leaves, which sounds a lot, but it's not really. It's not really a lot. Like it feels a lot.
You could do that in 1 minute, 1 leaf a second if you pick fast.
Exactly. And then you just chop them up or crush them, put them in boiling water for 20 minutes, like sizzle or boil away. And then you just leave it for like 12 to 24 hours for the saponins to release. And then you strain it. And then they call it a tea. So it's not quite thick, but it's got the tea in it. It lifts grease and dirt off your clothes. And I add a few essential oils to it.
I was just going to say, do you add a few essential oils?
I do, because I am my mother's child. And I know I don't need the smells, but the smells make me a bit happy.
One more question. 60 leaves is how many washes?
So it's a litre of water. They say about 100 to 200 mils. So it'll probably be like 4 or 5 washes.
Brilliant. Great.
But the conkers was 10 conkers to make about 1.5 litres. And I just put like the normal amount in that. And I mean...
Put a pin in that. It's not conker season. We'll come back to conkers.
We'll come back to that in autumn, yeah.
Lovely to see you, though. Welcome to May.
Yes, it's been lovely, May. I've seen lots of May activity, like mayflies and...
I got up this morning and went for a walk down along the River Tweed, got in the river.
Nice.
And noticed the stones on the shore all around the river were covered in stonefly exuvia, like the bit that they fly out of.
Oh yeah,
They're quite big, about 1.5 inches long, big uns, but still remaining clinging to the rock. So felt very May-y. I was walking across the river the night before, and there was swarms and swarms of insects. When it's just like they're in your hair, they're in your eyelashes, because it's such as the thickness of the emergence from the river. And there were swallows lined up on a telegraph line over the river,
just waiting
with all these insects around, and they were obviously just full. They could have just opened their mouth and without even flying. Such was the thickness of the insect emergence. But they just kind of sat there just like watching them go past like this, moving their little heads like, I can't eat another fly.
I mean, that's a lovely state of affairs to be in, that the swallows are full.
That swallow.
It is nice. I've noticed a lot more insects. I don't know if this is a thing, but we've had obviously a wetter winter and a wetter spring, but still with a lot of humid heat down here. And I wonder if that triggers a bit more insect life.
I've had 3 people comment to me the amount of insects stuck to the front of their cars, and I don't remember the last time, and it just seems to be a big year. Someone's probably looking into it. It'd be really great to know.
8 billion people on the planet. Someone's going to be looking into it.
Someone's looking into it. Let us know. Okay, so I feel like we're angling towards insects, bugs.
As always, but before we do, we've got a few segments. Do you want to
Yeah.
introduce the first one? Don't forget it's got the sting that you need to introduce.
Oh God, does the sting not just do it itself?
Nature news.
And that is nature news.
Right, do you want to go first then? What you got?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a little one.
Just a wee one.
Find these things interesting. Kind of, I think it's part of our obsession with wanting to have a solution and fix it things. I play a merry dance, Ryan, with rewilding. I play a very merry dance. I'm enticed by the idea of rewilding because I like the idea of ecosystem repair.
Yes.
I then dance away from rewilding when I see that no human involvement is ever involved. But anyway, that's by the by. This is a little project.
I love the way you introduce your opinions, but we're not here for that, ladies.
We're not here for that. Leave that at the door. Forget what I said. We're going to move on to the segment. So this is a project by Rewilding Europe, where European bison have been reintroduced to Romania. They disappeared from there about 200 years ago. So since then, more than 100 bison have been giving new homes in Tarku Mountains, growing to more than 170 animals today, the largest free-roaming populations in Europe. But the landscape could potentially hold 350 to 450. So there's just been some research, which has not yet been peer-reviewed. Ryan and I have very strong views on research and peer reviewing. But anyway, which basically calculates that actually the process of bison being in a landscape could actually contribute to storing CO2 emissions.
Wow.
I mean, let's jump to the result, really. More repaired ecosystems, more carbon sequestration. It seems like we find that every time, but it seems like it's the equivalent of removing those 170 bison, the equivalent of removing 43,000. It says US cars from the road. I don't know why it can't just be any cars.
Are they heavier cars in the US?
They're guzzlers. Maybe they're guzzlers.
Gas guzzlers. Hummers.
Hummers. So yeah, it's found that it's nearly 9.8 times more carbon than without the bison is stored.
Wow.
And I think that's just got to do with how they act in the landscape. One of those big kind of megafauna. We think that megafauna just are there and they're pretty, but actually they have an incredible, they play an incredible role in ecosystems in terms of how they maintain landscapes, in terms of kind of scrubbing up scrub and grassland and microhabitats and creating different distribution of microhabitats within a landscape. So yeah, there you go, bison. Nice. I would actually love a herd of bison roaming around the UK. That would be nice, wouldn't it?
It would. Imagine the anger.
Oh.
When they wander on the M25.
Oh God, the M25 south. No, is it southbound? Is it clockwise? How do they do it? Clockwise or east or set? What do they do with the M25? Because it's round.
Well, it's a circle, isn't it? So it can go either.
Yeah, but when one's blocked, do they say clockwise or anti-clockwise? They do, don't they?
I don't know. I don't drive. I think you're asking the wrong person.
Clockwise is blocked again for the bison. Well, they could do bison tunnels, couldn't they?
11.
Yeah.
That's nice though. It's nice when we hear about animals like megafauna as well delivering more than we maybe thought, but we always knew a disturbance, but if they're delivering that bit more. I
think we know these things intuitively deep in our hearts. I guess science helps convince the people that need to be convinced,
and it needs to be communicated. Not everyone knows this stuff. The scientists do, but the general public and the people in charge or power do not. So it is important to kind of report this stuff. Okay, well, I've got some shark stuff, which is exciting.
Great.
I love a shark. In an amazing discovery, scientists have stumbled across and discovered a first in the form of a nursery for hammerhead sharks in the Galapagos. The species, which is labelled as vulnerable on the IUCN, is rarely spotted in the marine reserve that they found. But after researchers spotted several young pups, they're called pups. I love it. I don't know. There's something that's very warm about that. In a small bay at Isabella Island, the Greenpeace expedition team thought they found a breeding ground in the archipelago, and they were right. The scientists were also able to tag one of the elusive sharks for that area for the first time, and hope that this is going to lead the way for greater protection of the species and its habitat.
Oh, nice.
Just nice bit of good news.
It's, like anything aquatic has always got an air of mystery about it, because we often don't know where things go and are because we're not in that space. Hammerheads are one of my dream, I just love them.
I think they're so unique and
Thank
so
God.
shape.
Thank God someone named them properly, right? So many things are not named well enough.
Do
you know what I mean?
True. It is so true.
It's like Lucy Lapwing famously thinks, grey wagtails should be called butterbums because they've got butterbums instead of grey wagtails. When they're not even grey, they've got yellow on them.
I've got a feeling Lucy Lapwing just tries to put butter into everything.
Yeah.
Always...
her mouth.
She's always talking to me about butter in some form. I don't think I've ever spoken to her about butter coming up.
Should we call her Lucy Lurpak?
Yes, absolutely. I'm changing it in my phone shortly.
Okay, great. Cool.
Well, there you go. Some nature news bit. It's now time for our next segment with our partners of 2024. It is, of course, time for the Royal Entomological Society segment of the month. There we go. So we are starting off with an online talk on the 12th of June on the evolving perspectives in Hymenoptera. I'm so bad at pronouncing words. Hymenoptera,
they shouldn't give them stupid names.
They shouldn't give them stupid names. Hymenoptera, which is a large group of insects, which includes like certain fly species, wasps and bees. Systemics with Tamara Spasovicic. I'm so sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. Again, I'm English and it's in my blood to do that to everyone. I'm so sorry. From the Natural History Museum in Vienna, and Miles Zhang from the University of Edinburgh. Next up, the RES will be at the Big Bang Fair, which sounds exciting as fuck, at the National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham, with a stand for young people to learn more about insect science and the careers within the sector. The 24th to the 30th of June sees this year's Insect Week around the UK and abroad. See the link in the write-up of this episode, nerds, for details, and Into the Wild will be jumping on board that train as well. On the 3rd of July at Gellets Hill International Research Centre, an event of AI in entomology is taking place that will focus on a 2-day dialogue between insect science and the emergent AI technologies. And lastly, the Aphid Special Interest Group... I know, and I know it's not run by aphids, but
that's not what I pulled the face for.
I know it's not, but my brain cannot get rid of the image of a bunch of aphids sat around the boardroom
on a leaf. Was it on the underside of a leaf?
Oh yeah, underneath. You have to look hard. You have to turn a leaf. Sorry, I'm going to say this again. I've lost my place. And lastly, Aphid Special Interest Group is on the 18th of July online with keynote talks from James Bell and Mariska Beekman. All the things I've just mentioned will have links in the write-up of the show, and if they do not, it will be on the events page of the RES, which is in the link of the write-up of the show. There we go. That is the end of that segment.
They're doing so much stuff. It just goes to prove that there is something for everybody when it comes to nature. Who knew there was an aphid interest group?
I love it. Right. Oh my God, can you hear that noise?
No, is it my tummy rumbling?
No. No. It's some insects. So we're going to jump into our main episode, but I've already heard the insect noise, so should we go? Should we jump into the episode?
Let's go. What a way to kick off, Ryan. I have got absolutely cutting edge, brand new data from a survey done in 2015.
Oh, brand new
of the British public for their favourite British insect. I've got here in front of me voted the top 10 insects.
Oh my God!
And it is your job now to try and guess that top 10. I've got a pen, so I have to do this with my head. Are you Googling it?
No, I was time checking the podcast.
Okay, I will.
Bit behind the scenes there, nerds.
We'll keep it quick.
We're good.
Okay, cool. All right, come on then.
Right, okay.
What is the UK's favourite insect? So from a survey done in 2015.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I just Googled it because I thought there's got to be a survey, and that's the one I've got.
Okay, well, I'm going to go. Do you want me to just list them?
So I want you to give me 10 quickly.
I'll give you 10 in the order I think they're in, and then you tell me how many I get right, if any. I'm going to go from 10 down.
Okay.
I'm going to go with 10. I wonder how specific it is. Okay, so 10, I'm going to go with...
We are at species level.
So individual, so there will be individual butterfly species?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm going to go with like the common woodlouse at number 10. I think people love them. They're a bit dopey. I'm then going to go like damselflies, or like, we'll just say red-banded damselflies or something. Or I think it's like a damselfly at number 9. Oh, okay. No, I can't.
Do you give up?
No, I'm going to go for it. Okay, then I'm a type of hoverfly at number... No, 10.
I'm hoping listeners, I hope you at home are also thinking about what you think the top 10 are. You're doing better than Ryan.
Number 7, I'm going to go like cabbage white butterfly, because I think gardeners would put that at number 7. Okay, and then I don't know in the middle, but I can tell you their top 3 will be bumblebee, stag beetle, and peacock butterfly or something.
Ryan, you have got 1 out of 10.
Oh, GCSE flashback.
Do you know what, though? I mean, some of the stuff, you did just say bumblebee. Right, okay, so I'm going to give you this. Interestingly, you said cabbage white. Gardeners hate them.
No, but they see them a lot.
They do, okay. And also woodlice. The general public don't like woodlice. Come on.
Who doesn't like woodlouse?
People that aren't into nature, like people that aren't weird like us.
Yeah, I guess so. I just think they look so dopey.
All right, at number 10, we have got the large bee fly. The large bee fly, fluffy.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I'd love you all. If you've not seen one, they are around at the moment. Absolutely beautiful. When you first see one, you'll never forget. Number 9 is the black garden ant.
Really? I mean, that surprises me.
That surprises me. The nemesis of nanas everywhere, and the receiving of boiling water from a kettle. Bless their little hearts. Okay, number 8 is garden tiger moth. What a babe.
Jeez, yeah.
Number 7, absolutely great, green shield bug. Do you know what? I should actually read the words that come from this, because they've done a good job. Number 7, kicking up a stink with green shield bug. Number 6, the gardener's friend, marmalade hoverfly. Absolutely gorgeous, big eyes on that one. You'll have seen him. Number 5, the big daddy stag beetle. You did say stag beetle.
Yeah. Surprised that's 5.
4th, the house sitter. That's the small tortoiseshell butterfly, comes in at number 4. Number 3, Lord of the Skies, emperor dragonfly. It's a surprising one, because people do freak out over dragonflies. Number 2, the divine messenger. No idea where it's called that. 7-spot ladybird. Oh, here we go. In the Middle Ages, it was considered a messenger from the heavens, as it incorporated the mystic number 7. There you go. And coming in at number 1, surprise me, it might surprise you too. It is the bee's knees, the buff-tailed bumblebee.
I'm absolutely not surprised at all. And I think that feeds in to what we're about to say on this episode.
Wow. Absolutely. What a lovely segue into this episode. We are talking. Go on. Well, you do it.
Well, we're talking about pollination, and specifically proving the point, nerds, that it's not just about bees. There is so much more to plant pollination than our lovely fuzzy bumblebees. Now, I am in no way slagging them off. Love them. Absolutely fanatic about bumblebees, but I think where we've kind of got people into like caring about insects and caring about pollinators and planting plants that help pollinators, the poster boy and girl for that is always the bee. And what this has done, as well as positively connect people to pollinators and insects, it has failed, I guess, a little bit in appreciating the other incredible amount of insects out there that are also pollinating not just wildflowers and trees and stuff, but also our crops, the things that we rely on to eat and get grains from. There are other species globally that are doing sometimes more than bees. So this episode is purely about uplifting these species so you are aware of what is happening in regards to pollination. So Nadia is going to tell us a bit about pollination, and then I'm going to bring 2 voices in. So over to you, Nadia Sheikh.
I would assume that everybody knows about what pollination is, but maybe not. Maybe
Never
not.
know.
Maybe we don't know. Maybe we don't know if you're not into your plants. Pollination is a thing that needs to occur so the male kind of genetic material can get to the female genetic material of the plant to create, to fertilize the plant so that it creates seeds for the next generation. It's also the process by which we get fruit and nuts and all kinds of things like that. So the majority of flowering plants have both a male part and a female part. There are some plants that have separate male plant and a female plant, but for the majority, that's the case. And because plants famously don't move in the way that mammals and insects and other
That
things
is
move.
pretty famous.
It's famous. They kind of just stand there. Although I'm sure some botanists are going to out there be like, what about this plant?
Yeah. Life.
So with regards to those, life, generally there needs to be an assistance to get the male genetic material onto the female bit of the plant. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the job of a pollinator. So evolutionary for millions of years, alongside plants evolving, also insects have evolved. They've created this beautiful relationship, which means that pollinators, not just bees, will land on a plant, and that genetic material transfer. You will have seen it on flowers. It's on the anther. It's that dusty stuff. It's the yellow stuff. Whenever your mum buys them lilies and puts them in a vase and then they stain everything, it's that stuff. That's the pollen. That's the pollen. That's the bit of the male plant. And so, yeah. So actually, about every 3 mouthfuls, I don't know why it's described as this on the Bug Life website, but here we go. Out of every 3 mouthfuls of food depends on pollinators. So I guess it can be so easy, like it's so easy to forget just because our food is so systemized. We go to the supermarket to buy it, that ultimately without insects or pollinators, we wouldn't have so much of our food in the supermarket. We just rely on it completely. So it's estimated that about 84% of EU crops and 80% of wildflowers rely on insect pollination. That's a huge amount. So if you enjoy wildflowers, but strawberries, apples, avocados, chocolate, cherries, olives, blueberries, carrots, grapes, pumpkins, pears, plums, or peanuts.
In that order.
What a feast. I've never done it yet. This is difficult.
Yeah.
Then basically those fruits, that produce that the flower produces, is because pollinators has visited that plant and allowed pollination to happen. So like Ryan said, usually we all think about bees as being the pollinator. Indeed, honeybees are used industrially across the globe to pollinate plants, but actually there's so much more, as is always the case when it comes to wildlife and nature conservation or whatever. It is often the smaller things lower down in the pecking order that haven't been given the greatest interest. Bees are cute and fuzzy and tend not to kind of want to sting you and don't freak people out, but I think we do ignore all of the other insects that act as pollinators. So there are also butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, wasps that also do this job as well. So about 250 species of other bees, not just the honeybee or the bumblebee, butterflies and moths. Globally is about 2,200 species and 6,700 flies of various other insects that do that job. So I guess hopefully that's just described the situation that we've got, is that this whole kind of group of wildlife biodiversity is so vital for, I guess it's important to link it back to humans, because what I'm trying to do is to hook people in, right? To see why is it relevant to us. Obviously, we know that pollinators are just important in and of themselves, because having a complete ecosystem, because stuff's going to eat those insects. Those insects need to eat things and they get that from the plants. So like there's the whole chain here. We know the food chain, but it's not just bees. There's so many other things. But always to bring in the bad news, just a little bit, about half of our 27 bumblebee species here are in decline. 3 of these bumblebee species have already gone extinct. 2/3 of our moths and 71% of our butterflies are in long-term decline. So this is why we need to highlight it and talk about how important that they are. And as is usually the case, unpredictable and extreme weather resulting from climate change is affecting their population, as well as intensive farming, fragmented habitats. So those flower-rich habitats where you get insect, they're kind of failing, and then they're really isolated from each other as well. And obviously the use of pesticides, we know pesticides, the word pest, right? How do you feel about the word pest?
I mean, there's certain people, but I mean, like, yeah, in regards to wildlife, no.
It's just kind of this blanket use of chemicals which kill insects, sadly, and a lot of insects are also pollinators. Loads and loads of different reasons there, but that is just an overview of what our pollinators are and what they do. There are thousands in this country, maybe not thousands, maybe a couple of thousand, that do a really good job of pollinating, but it is the majority of our flowering plants rely on pollinators. Wind and rain can also pollinate, and also humans, I can imagine, walking through a wildflower meadow, knocking a bit of pollen.
We especially do for crops. I know, like gardeners as well. We pollinate our plants sometimes if it's not happening themselves. There are people out there with cottonwool buds going around pollinating and doing that to certain plants, and whether it's to create new species or not.
I have done that. I've used a tiny little paintbrush to pollinate a lemon tree.
Yep, it's something that I think a lot of gardeners do, and a lot of places in developing countries that still do to rely on crops and stuff like that. It's still things that do take place, and I think it's that point, isn't it? Is that the nerds listening now? A lot of you may be aware that of course we need pollinators, and of course we need all insects. Why are we talking about this? Why are we uplifting this? Because when we hear about butterfly species declining, or moth species declining, or several species of flies declining, it's important to actually connect why that is an issue. You know, it's sad, it's emotional, and it shouldn't be happening, but it's important because if they're pollinating our food crops, obviously this is all about the future of our own species as well. And if we can tell people you've got to care about that moth species, not just because you know it's a nice emotional thing to have that connection with nature, but also we rely on it. And if we start that research and doing it, and we can actually put that out there and go, they are pollinating this, and we need that, whether it's to do with wild foods or crops or something, it kind of gives that species, in the same way it's given it to the bee, it's giving it to another species as well. So it is an important thing to explore. I'm going to bring someone in now because I was like, what? There's got to be an insect out there that people think is just absolutely fucking annoying or shit, right?
Oh, if you ask people, and you said, what would you get rid of?
Yeah, and I think
and also,
I
can I
found
just
it.
say, just before I go, midges and mosquitoes have also been known to pollinate too, right? So
exactly,
there'll be people that think have no purpose.
I'm pretty sure I was like, there's got to be a group of insects or a family of insects that is like, they must be doing research into the pollination, or we know it already, and that people also hate. And I fucking found it, and I was so happy, right? So I spoke to someone who's about to come in called Juliana. Juliana is a researcher and scientist in America. She was part of a team on this fascinating study, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because Juliana explains it wonderfully, about blowflies. Now, for a start, Juliana will say in a minute, but I've got to say there's 1,900 species of blowfly around the world.
What?
I know, it's so many. And we don't appreciate them. They're the type of fly that will fly in your house as soon as you open the window, and you're like, oh, that bloody fly. And I'm just going to let Juliana come in and talk to you about how much blowflies are actually doing potentially for pollination. So here's Juliana. Juliana, thank you for joining Into the Wild. Should we start with the obvious question and you telling us who you are and what you do?
My name is Juliana Rangel. I'm professor of apiculture in the Department of Entomology at Texas A&M University, which is located in the city of College Station, Texas, about an hour and a half north of Houston.
Nice. And the reason why we're talking today is we're looking at pollination, basically proving the point that it's not just bees. Bees are very important, very lovely animals, but in regards to pollination, we forget about a lot more animals that are out there. And I was fascinated by the paper that you were working on with your team, looking at blowflies. And I think, you know, one of the animals that are probably missed off the list the most are flies in general, but blowflies specifically. So before we get into that with their work in pollination, can you give us a quick introduction into the family of insects that are blowflies?
Yeah, sure. So blowflies belong to the family Calliphoridae. They are often also called carrion flies because they like to get some blood meals and or protein meals from decomposing carcasses and carrion. But they're also very important pollinators and underappreciated pollinators. There's about 1,900 known species of blowflies. And something really interesting about blowflies is that in terms of adults, the females need a substantial amount of protein to develop mature eggs within their ovaries. And so they need to feed on either a blood meal or, as I said, carrion, or potentially, as we have found, pollen, which is a huge source of protein for a lot of insect pollinators, to lay eggs. And so that's one of the interesting things about blowflies. So they, as I said, can feed on carrion, they can feed on blood, but they also can potentially feed on pollen from flowers to, especially in the case of females, be able to activate their ovaries and lay eggs.
That's amazing. And I guess it does make sense when we start to think about it in the way you've said there. They require that high energy, that protein, which, you know, we know sugar gives a lot of high energy and stuff. 1900 species blows my mind, and that will always blow my mind because I can't hold that information quite.
Right.
Like I sit there and try and picture 1900 different types of blowfly, and it's just impossible. But it might sound a bit of an ignorant question on this. Are these a family of flies that are found globally?
They are globally, there's about only a couple hundred species in the neotropics and a huge number of species in Africa and Southern Europe. Of course, we have them here in the Americas. So they're very cosmopolitan. They've been quite successful worldwide. And so they have, of course, with so many species, they have different life history traits and they have different appearance. The general body plan of the usual fly that it has the shiny body, few kind of sticky looking hairs, big eyes, but in general, definitely the shiny metallic coloring that's either blue, green, or black with the very feathery, very short antennae.
I mean, for being global as well and having so many species, like they're an important species enough if we look at a food source for other animals as well, and for using decaying meat and stuff like that and getting rid of that and turning it into something else. But now if we're looking at pollination, being such a big family of insects and also being global, this could raise their status even more to going like, they could be very, but let's get into this. Let's start talking about the actual pollination of this because I'm kind of fascinated. How did you and your team go around finding out whether or not pollination of plants played a role in the lives of certain blowfly species?
Sure. So I have to shout out to my colleague, fellow professor of entomology, Dr. Aaron Terone, who's a professor of forensic entomology here in the department. And he studies, as the name indicates, he studies insects that are of forensic interest. So the especially fly species that are those that first invade dead bodies, right? So they're useful in forensic investigations, the post-mortem interval or the time after death when a cadaver is found. The scientists can learn a lot about how long that has been depending on the type of insect larvae that are found on those bodies, right? So it's a little creepy, not everyone's cup of tea, but he's a specialist in forensic entomology. And we got together because some of the forensic entomology species he studies, which some of which are blowflies, he had read a lot of interesting papers showing that some of these blowflies are actually very important pollinators of some specific types of plants. In particular, they like to pollinate crops that emit odors that are almost similar to the odors that are released by carrion. Very kind of, to us, they're probably not the best smelling flowers. They smell like rotting meat. But to them, it smells like a bouquet of deliciousness. And so, of course, the plants have co-evolved with their pollinators to provide the food source and rewards. And in return, they get the pollination service from the fly. Some of these known plants that blowflies pollinate include onions, even mangoes and avocados. But in particular, a lot of these plants that smell like death. and they go for it, and they're actually quite efficacious pollinators of those plants, even more so than any bee species would be.
I mean, I'm a 34-year-old man. You just said they can pollinate the plants of avocados. That's very important to my age range. That's a very, very important.
For your avocado toast? That's absolutely true.
I think if we're gonna get people to appreciate blowflies, I think we've just found the way in, the door to open for the millennials.
Right. So to finish off the point was that Aaron said, well, I've read that they pollinate certain plants, and I'm wondering if they might actually be taking this pollen as the source of protein, especially for females, because we know that all of these female blowflies need a protein meal before they can lay eggs. And that was the motivation for the study. And so that's how it all started. And it actually was a multi-year study with several objectives. And what was cool about it is that we engaged a lot of undergraduate students. The undergrads, instead of a graduate student project, this was led by undergrads doing their bachelor's degree that would take a few hours a week to work on this project. And it actually turned out to be a really, really cool project with a lot of very interesting results.
It's amazing. It's so cool that, like, to see this kind of collaborative approach using people from different aspects of science as well. Like, trying to really use a species to determine I don't know, the things that happen in their life that we have no idea about, but we're coming up from different angles. And I think the big question for you, and the big point of this episode that we're doing is: are blowflies, for you or from your research with your team, underrepresented when it comes to plant pollination? And is this just the start of the door being open to what we know about pollination with blowflies?
I think you actually just said it. There have been a few recent studies that have actually shown that blowflies pollinate certain crops, as I just said. What's interesting about our study is that we weren't focusing on a specific plant pollinator syndrome, but we were surveying blowflies in the environment and then gathering information from by dissecting these flies that we gathered from the environment and looking at whether there was pollen in their gut. Pollen is everywhere. It's this powdery substance, and there can be cross-contamination. If a fly is going to a flower, maybe to just either rest or to collect nectar. And as they do so, they might get some pollen on their body, on their hair, because the insects are hairy, and those hairs are actually there not just for protection, but also to help with these pollination services. But we weren't interested in that kind of cross-contamination or potential cross-contamination or incidental contamination. We were interested in whether these flies were actually consuming pollen, and not just of one particular species, but of several species of plants. And that was the question. And so we set out baits. So the bait would be, decomposing meat, which was not fun to obtain, because then you would have to lay out pieces of meat and let them kind of rot for a couple of days until they started smelling really foul to us. But to them, it was like, a cash crop. Then the students would set out the baits at these botanical gardens and wait for the flies to arrive, would collect them and place them in individual containers, and then brought them back to the lab for analysis. But again, because there could be just incidental pollen on their bodies, we washed their bodies and cleaned everything that was on the surface of the fly. And we were interested more in what was in the gut. So then we dissected the gut of the flies and looked for pollen, not just pollen grain number, but also identification to the lowest possible taxonomic level of the pollen that was, and how many pollen grains of each taxonomic group were present in each individual. So it's harder to say that this was incidental contamination because the fly needed to have ingested the pollen for it to be in their gut. And so that's what we basically did.
Wow, so this really is the door being opened into, like, I guess you were like, well, let's go into the unknown and find out. So I guess to close this off for blowflies, what would you say to the world about appreciating an animal that we probably shoo out of our house all the time, or we don't give two thoughts about, compared to a bumblebee, for example? What would you say to people about a blowfly?
These blowflies are not as charismatic as bumblebees or any other cute little fuzzy bee, but they are underappreciated pollinators. Some of the things that we found, not just that there was a diverse of plant types that we found pollen from, but a lot of it was arboreal, so trees and pollen from trees. And so we see them in our house, they annoy us, but then sometimes we don't see them. What are they doing the rest of the day? They could be actually collecting pollen, well, they are not able to get any protein from elsewhere. They might be collecting pollen from high above ground where we can't see them, and they're actually providing a very important pollination service. So it may not just be of known flowering plants, but of these trees that you would not have any idea that these blowflies are actually hanging out in trees, potentially in times of dearth, if there's no carcasses anywhere or people to annoy, then they will just be hopefully at least getting some protein from these plants. And in return, the plant is receiving the pollination service from this pollinator. So I think that absolutely this is yet another one of these important studies that contributes to our limited knowledge of the role of blowflies in pollination ecology worldwide.
There we go. It's so exciting with this kind of stuff because it's like doors opening. We're learning more about it, and I know the blowflies can be annoying when they come into your house or go around your face, and it's that kind of noise.
And they just occupy your window space.
Yeah, for the next 24 hours. But they are potentially pollinating a lot more than we do. And I mean, nerds, like I said on that chat, if you eat avocados, you've got to appreciate blowflies now. You ain't got a choice, bruv. If you want to keep eating that avocado...
This is how we're going to save the insects. This is how we're going to guacamole.
This is how we're going to get the millennials on board for our toast. So there we go. And there's one more species that I wanted to explore, Nadia, because we've talked about them several times on the podcast. We actually spoke about them on the last episode with Seri and Sumner, and that's the wasp. And wasps have such a bad rep.
I would say worse than blowfly. And also, potentially, have anyone ever put them in room 101?
No. Dare they?
Okay.
An entire family. No. It would have to be a specific, but wasps have such a bad rep. And it's something that I wanted to kind of explore a bit more because they're visually a lot different to bees, and like when you look at them, they kind of don't look like they would maybe target pollen. They're not built for it in the same way that bees look like they're built for it.
I also just think we associate flowers as being something lovely and gentle and beautiful, and so butterflies and bees and flowers, and wasps would just shun a flower.
They look like they've got a bit of attitude, and I don't think they look like they. Yeah, I get your point, right? But Kate has done some incredible research. Kate is a PhD researcher and entomologist in the States as well. And I got to speak to Kate very briefly about her project and her paper. And this is what Kate had to say about wasps and pollination.
My name is Kate Borchardt. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and I study plant pollinator communities in both bees and wasps and all the other pollinators out there.
Plant pollinator communities are probably like three of the most wonderful words put together. It just sounds like a bunch of wholesomeness. It sounds very lovely. We're keen to hear about wasps, about what part wasps play in pollination globally, or kind of what you've learned in your research and your work with your team and stuff like that. So let's get into this. So you worked on a research paper which looked at debunking the kind of myths around wasps as pollinators, or just the attitudes around wasps. Do you want to start by telling us when you started this research, what were those myths? What was the attitudes towards wasps?
Well, the overall attitude was just not really looking at their pollination ability. And this was based off of a couple of assumptions that people had made. Wasps only forage for nectar out of the flowers, so maybe they aren't as loyal to visiting the same plant over and over, which would then lead to better pollination. They're also not as fluffy as bees. They don't actively collect pollen. They don't have special pollen storage. So maybe they don't carry enough pollen grains to actually transfer those to plants and fertilize them and then produce seeds. And overall, these kind of assumptions lead to, well, wasps aren't very likely to be effective pollinators. But there wasn't a lot of research on whether this was true or not, and, the diversity of wasps, whether this was always true. So we wanted to really kind of target these assumptions and test it to see if wasps maybe do belong somewhere on the spectrum of effective pollinators.
Where did your part play into this? Because I always find this fascinating when you say like that, there wasn't that much research out there, if any at all. So how did you, Kate, decide, well, I want to get into this research? What was it that led you down that path?
Well, I've always done research on pollinator communities, which has always included wasps. And my graduate advisor, Dr. Amy Toth, who's also a co-author on the paper, has studied paper wasps in great detail and other kinds of wasps. And so we really wanted to, first off, just collect wasps, see what they were doing in these communities. And then that led to more and more kind of controlled, targeted studies on wasp pollination, which in accumulation led to this paper.
Let's talk about this paper a little bit, because it's, there's always lots to this research, and they quite often span over a lot of time. And I think sometimes we try and boil it down to too simple, and I think when it takes up a lot of your time, let's get into it a little bit. So how did you go around researching and finding the answers about just how much wasps do pollinate, especially a target pollination?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and that's, I think, one of the coolest things that came out of this paper was our new method for looking specifically at wasp pollination. And so we wanted to look at, effective pollination from the plant side. So how many grains did a wasp leave on a flower after it visited a single time, which then, leads to fertilization and seed set. And so the problem with wasps compared to bees, there's lots of methods on how to look at this in bees. Either you just watch a plant and wait for bees to come, or you actually follow them around with a long stick with a little flower on the end and just hope that they visit your flower. This didn't work very well with wasps. And this is because bees look for both nectar and pollen at flowers. So they're always just kind of looking for flowers when they're out foraging. But wasps, they either go to flowers for nectar for themselves, or they hunt prey items for their offspring. So, we tried chasing them around with the flower on a stick. Didn't exactly work. So we had to reassess how to do this. And what we did is we put them in an enclosed environment where they just learned where the flowers were. And so they would keep revisiting that location, and we could swap them out with the different treatments of flowers we had, and then collect our data.
Nice. Okay. And once you've collected the data here, did you or you and your team have any kind of expectations about what you might find going into this kind of research and kind of getting this data out? Before you collected all that, what did you think you were going to see?
Well, we did pick a certain species and a certain flower that we thought would produce, potentially really good results as the first case study. So we picked the paper wasp Pollistes fiscatus, which is often found on goldenrod flowers late in the fall. And so we picked that as a study system because we thought, they're on these flowers so much, maybe they're helping to pollinate it. And then we compared them to the bumblebee Bombus impatiens as kind of, that bee has been studied many, many times. That's a good kind of yardstick for how to compare this wasp pollination. And so we did find that they were comparable. There's some evidence that potentially male paper wasps of Pollistes fiscatus are actually better pollinators. So with further study and, more different kinds of plants, different kinds of wasps, I think we can really start to understand where wasps fit in as pollinators.
So this is kind of like a door opening bit of research. This is like once you get these answers, it kind of conjures up more questions than it does answers, I guess. You're kind of like, well, now we want to know even more, what kind of happens. And is this research that you hope kind of is going to start happening globally around within Europe and in the global south as well, to kind of look at how other insects like wasps play a part in pollination, especially for, I guess, crops and stuff like that as well?
Yeah, we really hope that this starts, just more interest in wasps and further, more targeted, plant-centric focus. We just looked at how many pollen grains were on the flowers. You can take it even farther to see how many seeds are produced from those pollen grains to get a better idea of plant pollination. So hopefully that does fill in that role a little bit better globally.
The big question, I guess, for you in your own words, just how important are a species like wasps? Because I think we've spoken about this on the podcast before. Wasps, when we hear the word wasp, I'm not sure how it is in in America, but certainly in the UK, we only think of 1 or 2 species of wasps when we say that. And it's mainly the yellow jackets that we've got over here, the ones that, that in late summer, they're out of the hive or they're coming over to our picnics and our food because they're starving and they're unemployed and things like that. And they bother us, right? So those are the species that we think of, and we know just that there's so many more thousands of more species of wasp. So how important are wasps globally when we look at pollination for both food and wild plants as well?
Well, the added benefit of wasps, if you compare them to bees, is that wasps are also hunting for prey items for their offspring. So this can help control pest populations in both natural communities and agricultural communities. And one idea that some people have approached us with for our opinion is, can we use social wasps such as paper wasps or other kinds to kind of bring into crop fields for that added pollination and pest management service? Similar to how we bring in, honeybee colonies or bumblebee colonies to help with plant pollination, maybe we can also get the benefit of, controlling those pest populations.
It kind of makes sense, doesn't it, really? Like as a control method, because it is actually really effective. We know this in we see it in our gardens when we see these species here. You see lower populations of these prey insects and stuff on our plants of any kind. So it kind of makes sense. It almost feels like 2 birds, 1 stone. Like you're bringing in a species like this that, might have that ability to pollinate, but also have that ability to just control pests on our crops. For you, do you agree that that's just a win-win?
Yeah, I think it's a win-win. And I think that, wasps are a little unappreciated because we have so many kind of negative feelings towards them, especially, ordinary people, because they tend to build nests, near our houses and places where we interact with them a lot. And they tend to be more defensive and aggressive around those nests, but they also contribute a lot to our natural communities. And that's why if you have nests that aren't bothering you, you should really leave them up and let them, take place in their community and kind of manage those pest populations and add to the pollination.
I love the use of the word community when we're looking at pollinators. I don't know what that is about. I just think it sounds so wholesome. I really do. It's such a lovely word to use, and I think actually using a word like community actually does kind of, I don't know, make it relatable in some sense from an ecology point of view. It kind of goes, everything's playing its part and in that system, and wanting to remove that, you're taking out of a community of the biodiversity around you, and it just doesn't work. So I really like the use of that word. So if you could have like the whole world on a platform, then kind of last question to sum this up. If you had the whole world listening now and you had to like big up wasps to try and kind of get people on board, how would you do that to them? How would you convince people about wasps?
One of my favorite facts about wasps and bees is that evolutionarily speaking, wasps are the larger group and bees are within that group. So if you like bees, you already like a subset of wasps. And I think people just need to extend those warm, happy feelings that we have about bees to wasps and understand that they do have a role in the larger pollinator community and the larger ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's been lovely to talk to you and to hear a bit more about wasps and hear about their part in pollination as well. And listeners, if you would like to read the research paper, as always, it is linked in the write-up of this show. There we go. A huge thanks to Kate for coming on the show, which I will say, actually, Kate said to me that was her first ever podcast chat.
Aww.
So it was an absolute pleasure to host Kate on the show. And Kate, you did an amazing job. I will say both Kate and Juliana's research papers are in the write-up of this episode. So do go on there and have a look. It's got all the information on there if you want to learn a bit more. But there we go.
What, God bless people that really get deep into insects.
I know. I love it. I really do love it. And I love it because I get to learn about it.
Yeah, no, but it's just so beautiful. Do you know what I feel like whenever we do episodes like this or whatever? It's like we're just like unlocking a thing in your brain that we've told a story that you can't now unsee. So now when you go out into the world and you see all these different kinds of insects, you're recognizing that they're all doing the job of pollination. And move over bees, like allow yourself to recognize this constant thrum of things feeding and moving and pollinating. Like nature is chaos, but I just think a swift has just flown up the window next to me, potentially into a nest just above the window. It's just come within inches of the window. That's pretty cool. You know what swifts eat? Insects. You know what insects are also? Pollinators.
Nerds didn't see Nadia's face going, now I've got to relate this back to the topic.
This is the chaos that we talk about. Like, I think sometimes we do just see chaos, but when you stop and you look, it's a bloody symphony out there.
And I will say, this is why we like to platform this kind of stuff, nerds, as well, because you all now know that there are blowfly species, certainly around America and Texas, that are pollinating avocados. Tell everyone that. Tell everyone you talk to about nature and go, do you know blowflies pollinate avocado plantations? And it's like, it will just start opening that door of that appreciation of different species, and the same with wasps and things like that. But, well, I hope this episode has shown you a bit more about pollination. Like Nadia said, a topic that we probably all know.
You all know. You learn in primary school.
We learn about it. We know what it is. But we also are pushed with, when you buy a pack of wildflower seeds, it's pollinator friendly. There's a picture of a bee on it. It's all these things. It's always bee focused. But it's important to understand that there are so many more insects that play just as much, if in some cases more so, of an important role for both wildflowers and our crop flowers than bees do. And it's important that we lift these.
And remember, for those people who are very much into aphids out there,
there are a group of aphids that are especially interested in their own.
They want to know.
Well, nerds, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Into the Wild. Been lovely to chat to you. We should say now, because it's coming up to June, that Into the Wild is going to be at Global Bird Fair 2024 in a couple of months on the 12th, 13th and 14th of July at Global Bird Fair in Rutlandshire. Into the Wild will be doing 2 live shows on the Osprey stage of Nature Room 101 with some fantastic guests. All information is going to be on social media soon. So if you're attending Global Bird Fair or you're thinking about attending Global Bird Fair, grab your tickets, come and say hello to me and Nadia when we host a live recorded show, 2 live recorded shows in front of a live audience where we get to say some shit.
Yeah, have a beer with us afterwards.
Come and have a beer with us afterwards. It'd be lovely to see and meet some of our listeners. And the same old stuff, nerds. If you've got a few pennies, I know things are tight, but if you do have any pennies at all, please, if you'd like to throw them our way at ko-fi.com/intothewildpod. Everything you give goes into the making of the show. And if you don't follow us on social media, what the hell are you doing? Into the Wild Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. We'd love to see you there. All information is in the write-up of this show. But until next time, from me and Nadia, loads of love and see you soon. Thanks for tuning into the show, nerds. If you don't already, make sure to follow us on social media at Into the Wild Pod on Twitter and at Into the Wild Podcast on Instagram.
And if you're able to and would like to, you can support the show by tipping us at ko-fi.com/intothewildpod. That buys us the equivalent of a coffee, and we use it to fund more podcasts for your ears.
But until next time, keep well and live the good life.